Hey everyone, it's Bob with another FINOP Controller webcast. This week we're going to be talking about making the deposit for the reserve calc. The interesting thing with this is that most of the action is going to be done by the Treasury Department. However, you're going to be responsible for their actions and to make sure that all the documentation is held. So let's get started. Okay, what we're going to cover today. Firstly, what makes a bank account a reserve account? What can be deposited into the reserve account? How much should be deposited? What are the time frames that cover deposits? And what can happen to make a deposit be considered insufficient? Here's the simplest view of the customer reserve calc. You're going to add up all your customer credits. You're going to subtract off customer debits. You're going to make a determination of what needs to be deposited. And by doing that, you're going to, as we said, you net your credits with your debits. You're going to add an additional cushion, and that's made up of the firm's cash. This is to cover errors and omissions. You're going to do a review, and in those questions you're going to answer would be, were the numbers input correctly? Does the spreadsheet foot? Do all the departments agree with the results? And if all that happens, you're ready to go. Then you're going to issue the instructions to Treasury, and when they get done, you're going to review proof of deposit, and then finally file the calculation and the related backup. We've discussed this in previous webcasts. Again, here are credits in customer accounts 1 through 5. That's cash we've received on the behalf of customers, or in some instances, it's when we use customer property as collateral and we've received cash on their behalf. Lines 6, 7, 8, and 9, they're charges for inefficiency. They're generally aged items that you'll find in suspense accounts. For the debit categories, they're much less than what we had for credit, but essentially they're debits in margin and cash accounts for customers. The other items are generally related to credit items that we had in the first 5 categories. Couple of disclaimers and notes. This presentation is for educational purposes only. If you're doing an actual reserve calculation, I'm going to refer you to the rules you can find at finro.org. And I think really the best way to make use of this presentation is to review it versus your firm's calculation and to compare the items. So for the customer reserve deposit, step 1 is determine the required deposit. Step 2 is add a cushion that consists of the firm's capital, and that amount should be large enough to cover any possible errors in the calculation. Also, you got to remember that when you're doing the calculation, you've got time constraints. You're probably making use of a lot of estimates, and because of that, you're going to have to cover for those also. And then for step 3, determine what's currently held on deposit in the customer reserve accounts and compare with the amount calculated in steps 1 and 2. And then finally make a deposit or withdraw the difference determined in step 3. Now, for the time frames, the deposit or the withdrawal must be completed within 1 hour of the bank opening the day after the calculation. And say, for example, if your calculation's done on Monday based on Friday's close of business numbers, then the deposit must be made on Tuesday, 1 hour after the bank opens for business. All right, so what makes up a special reserve bank account for the exclusive benefit of customers? Here, Treasury usually manages banking relationships. However, the customer reserve bank account requires specific representations from the bank. The firm's legal department should be part of establishing the relationship for this account. There are certain elements that have to be part of the agreement. You can find those within the rule. A couple of other things to be aware of, though, is you want to verify that the agreement is printed on the bank's letterhead and signed by one of its officers, in other words, the bank's officers. Now, a bank cannot assert any liens against the account, because as you're aware, SIPC is going to take over the firm's assets in bankruptcy and they don't want to have to fight against any liens. However, a bank can obey any court orders. Now, a bank can charge for the account, an account fee. However, they cannot withdraw the amount from the EBOC account. That would count as a withdrawal, and a withdrawal requires a reserve calculation. So normally what you do is you set it up so that the bank withdraws any bank account fee from another firm account. Also, when you're opening a new account, you might want to check it the first couple of months to make sure they are in fact doing that. Now, the EBOC account cannot be connected or linked to any other accounts. You can't use an offshore account for this. And after legal and treasury sign off on this, you should yourself review the agreement versus the rules to make sure that you're comfortable that this is going to, in fact, meet muster with FINRA and the SEC. So how to manage the deposit process. First of all, Treasury will hold reserve accounts at several banks, and they'll split the deposit withdrawal amount between them. Now, there is a maximum deposit amount at a single bank that you can deposit in any one bank, and that's 15% of the bank's equity capital as reported on their most current call report. Call reports you can locate on the internet. They're not that hard to find, but you got to make sure that the amounts that you're kept in there are less than what the 15% bank equity capital requirement is. And the reason being is that anything that is above that that's in there is going to be considered insufficient funds for deposit. Now, you want to remind Treasury of the time frame for making the deposit/withdrawal. Generally, it's going to be around 10 a.m. of the day for the deposit. If they blow that, then you're going to end up having to notify all of the firm's regulators that you have failed to make a deposit on time. And that's going to involve legal and everyone above. Finally, when you get done with the deposit, you want to do the deposit by requiring banks to provide time-stamped backup, usually from their back office systems. All right, funding the reserve deposit. What can go into a reserve deposit account? And that can be either cash, CDs, or qualified securities. A qualified security is a security that's been issued or guaranteed by the U.S. government. So therefore, Treasuries and Ginnie Mae's, yes, Fannie and Freddie, no. If you're going to use securities, you're going to got to make sure that the market value is about 102% of the deposit amount, and you want to monitor that value throughout the week. So if you're making the deposit on Tuesday, you should probably check the value on Thursday to make sure that you're still above 102%. Now for cash. Cash seems to be pretty simple. However, you want to make sure that you never make a deposit from an overdrawn account, even if it will be cleared by the close of business. Best way to do that is to actually wire the cash into the account. By doing that, it's proof that there was cash in the sending account to make the deposit. All right, you'll also have some rebalancing of the reserve accounts or substitution of securities if you're using securities. So for rebalancing, that's increasing the deposit at one bank and reducing the deposit at another bank. Generally, this is Treasury that's going to initiate this. Substituting securities, that's replacing one security issue with another security issue. And that's usually going to happen if the security you're using is subject to a recall. In other words, it's borrowed or it's a reverse repo. Or if you have this as inventory, the trading desk has actually sold this particular issue. Make sure that when you're doing this, that you make the deposit or substitute the security issue into the new bank first. Then you're able to withdraw the deposit or the security from the original bank. If you do it the other way, you're going to have problems with having a withdrawal. All right, let's talk about rebalancing the reserve accounts or substituting securities. Rebalancing cash is best performed during normal funding timeframes after a calculation. Therefore, there's no questions. Security substitutions are specifically allowed by the rules without a calculation. That's it for today. If you have any other additional questions, please send me an email at bob@rmmilburnconsulting.com. Thanks again for your time.